So we've been talking about the Bernie Sanders Medicare for All bill that was introduced this week with 16 Democratic Party co-sponsors in the Senate. And here to join us, or joining us now to talk about that, is our good friend Nancy Altman, good friend of the program and of ours. Nancy is the president of Social Security Works. She is also chairman of the board of the Pension Rights Center. And she has written a piece entitled Medicare for All, the Next Step in the New Deal. So first of all, Nancy, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Secondly, thanks for writing this piece, because I think it's important for people to understand that the idea of a Medicare for All program to ensure that every American or every resident of this country has government funded and managed health insurance is not a crazy new idea dreamed up on the fringes of society, but actually has been a part of policy making on the Democratic side of the ledger for, what, 80 years now, right?
Actually, even longer than that. If Franklin Roosevelt and his colleagues came back to life today and they would pick up the paper and see this Medicare for All, and they'd be, of course, pleased, but they would be scratching their heads and saying, we thought this was going to happen right away. I mean, we were pushing for it in the 1930s. Well, everything so long. And I think that is the question, because I think it's just common sense, and it's what every other country has done. It's this idea that you cannot be economically secure, which is what they were fighting for, if you're one illness or accident away from bankruptcy. And the only way to have quality health insurance that every one of us is entitled to is through a universal Medicare for All system.
So you quote Molly Dewson, who was a member of the Social Security Board, as it was called then, in 1938, saying adequate health protection is already on the horizon. It will be enacted, maybe not today or tomorrow, but sometime in the not unforeseeable future. I would say that Molly Dewson probably in 1938 would have considered the fact that this is a controversial idea in 2017. I think that would have been unforeseeable, in fact, to somebody like that and her peers. That's what you're saying, right?
Well, the thing I love about that quote is she talks about several programs that are on the horizon and not yet enacted. One is prohibition of child labor. The other is minimum wage, and she was right about those. I mean, those became law like in the next year. They were definitely right on the horizon. But she lumped with that health insurance, which is, you can understand, that's how they were thinking about it. We've got to have a minimum wage. We have to have maximum hours. We have to get rid of child labor. We've now got old age security protection. We need disability protection. We need health insurance. That's the way they were looking at it. And so, again, they would be President Roosevelt was committed to this. He almost put it in the Social Security Act, but thought it was just too much of a lift to have so much going to Congress at once. But he was setting the stage for it. He had a conference about it, and they were having internal discussions, and that's why Molly Dewson said she's part of those discussions, just around the corner. But World War II intervened. But even then, he kept saying, we can do both. Let's do it. And, of course, Trump tried very hard. But by that time, the Republicans and the medical establishment was fighting back hard.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Now, I've also always understood that it got a little bit of a lower priority in some people's minds because medical health care costs, health insurance costs anyway, were so low at the time, and employers started offering it, Kaiser during World War II and so on. So some people, I think, put it on the back burner, but then you had this intense ideological opposition to it as well. I guess more ferocious, perhaps, because of the American Medical Association's involvement, but for whatever reason, much more ferocious than the opposition to child labor laws, for example, right?
Well, and I think you're right that what happened during World War II, where there were wage and price controls, aside from, a lot of our productive capacity and so forth going towards the war effort, we had wage and price controls, and so employers couldn't compete on increasing cash compensation, but they could compete by giving deferred compensation, health insurance, retirement benefits, and so that became part of the union negotiating package. So it somewhat diminished the drive, but on the other hand, I think everyone always understood that, first of all, there were groups like older people and people with disabilities and low-income people who were not going to be able to do this without government involvement. And they also could look around the world and see that the most efficient and best, fairest way to do it is through a government-sponsored program. So the need might have diminished somewhat, but the advocates were still focused on it. And in fact, in response to what happened in the 1940s and then the election of Dwight Eisenhower, so they knew that it was not going to be imminent, they changed their tactics and they decided to do it incrementally. They did the hardest part first, which was to cover those who have the highest medical needs and expenses. The rest of it should have been easy, and that's why Bernie Sanders' proposal makes so much sense. And that's why I say he's fulfilling this concept of the New Deal, which really certainly started in the 1930s, but was even before that. There was push for this universal health insurance.
So, and again, we're talking with Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, about Medicare for All. So, Nancy, I get that there were these historical flukes and diversions, side streets. Our nation got kind of diverted down into. Here's what I don't get about today's debate. FDR, as you quote, said that the Social Security Act represents a cornerstone in a structure which is being built is by no means complete. The architects of Medicare felt they were building something that would then be expanded to the rest of the population. I get that because of these historical diversions and so on, that it's tough to do, it's complex, there's a lot of moving pieces involved. What I don't get is the fact that there are still people on the and I certainly get the Republicans hate it because they hate government, but what I don't get is the cadre of Democrats that don't even seem willing to acknowledge that it's doable or that it's completely in line with the tradition of their party.
Yes, well, I think the answer, you could put dollar signs in there. You've got the one thing that they didn't have in the 30s, so it would have made it easier in the 30s, was this very built-up drug, pharmaceutical industry that's contributing to all these campaigns, along with these very powerful insurance companies that are contributing to campaigns, medical device manufacturers that are contributing to campaigns. And so it's a kind of willful refusal to see. I actually don't think it's complicated. The details are complicated, as almost any issue is. But the broad concept is simple. The idea is we have a Medicare, which is more efficient than other insurance, which covers the most expensive part of the population. For those of us who are on it are amazed at how no paperwork there is. You don't have to be fighting with insurance companies. You don't have to file claims. And, of course, you'll have more freedom of choice if we have Medicare for All, because there'll be no such thing as doctors and networks or out of networks, because all doctors will participate, so you can go to anyone you want. It's actually a very simple concept. It is any of us can get sick. Any of us can have an accident. We all, just with Social Security, we pool our risks, and we all contribute, and we all draw out. And it works for Social Security, it works for Medicare, and it would work for Medicare for All. But it's amazing to me that in just a few years ago, no one was talking about expanding Social Security. No policymakers were. It was a kind of fringe idea, and no one was talking about expanding Medicare. And it's very heartening to see how quickly it shifted. And I think the reason it shifted is because it's letting the genie out of the bottle. People aren't thinking about it, but as soon as you say, let's just expand Medicare to everybody, you go, yeah, why not? That's a good idea. And so it has this virtue of making a lot of sense to people.
Yeah, I think so too. And while the counter argument is, well, no, let's go for incremental change instead, I keep making the point that something like 40% of our health expenditures already are covered by government health insurance, so it is incremental.
Yes, and you could, I mean, and in fact, the Sanders legislation has a transition. It's not like tomorrow, but it's within 4 years. And I think he lowers the age to 55 the first year and so forth. And you could compromise on how fast or slowly to phase it in, but the ultimate goal is the goal that makes sense, and that is that at the end of the road, no matter how long that road is, at the end of it, we will have a very simple system, cradle to grave. You have your Medicare card, you go to a doctor, you show it to the doctor, you get the treatment you need, and that's all, from your point of view, that's all you have to think about.
Right, and Nancy, you and I have talked about the details of this at length, and hospital financing and high-price specialists, and all of those things. Sure, it's an undertaking. There are different facets to it, but we used to consider ourselves a country that can get things done. Since when did our ideology become that we're the little engine that couldn't?
Exactly, and especially, and I loved this in the press conference yesterday. I think it was Senator Booker was saying, I'm kind of competitive, and I don't like this that Canada has a better, more popular system than ours. I mean, every other country has been able to accomplish this. It's crazy that we can't. And in fact, the beauty of this is that we will wind up paying less for health care. The money may be going to different entities. It will go to the Medicare Trust Fund rather than, the insurance company or something. But the amount of money going out of pocket and going collectively from all of us will be much lower. The tax expenditure for employer-sponsored health insurance is the highest tax expenditure that we have. We're already spending billions of dollars for Medicaid at both the federal level and the state level. We're spending money on the CHIP program. We're spending money on uncompensated care when people go to emergency rooms. The experts can figure out how do we make sure we continue to have state of the art, how do we make sure the doctors are appropriately compensated, and so forth. There are lots of details, but I consider those just very solvable questions. This is really a very simple concept, and that is that we have no startup costs. We've already adopted Medicare. That was done back in 1965, and that's a whole interesting story in itself. But that was the program was started. We covered the most expensive parts of the population: seniors in 1965, people with disabilities in 1972. It's easier to cover everybody else. Children have, on average, very low health care costs. It's all preventive care. They're an easy group. They're very inexpensive to cover. Working people are less expensive than someone who's 90 or someone who's in a wheelchair. So we've done the hard part. So the idea that we can't do the easy part is mind-boggling.
So I guess that leads me to my last question for you, Nancy Altman, which is, so are you optimistic this will come to pass?
Well, it will. I think that Senator Sanders, when he talks about a political revolution, is correct. I think that it is something that has to be a campaign issue that people are voting for, and I think it is a very popular issue and people will want it. Because you do have to, if it's not, it'll be behind closed doors, and the drug industry and the hospitals and so forth will do everything they can to defeat it because they want their profits. So I believe that it is doable. I'm not going to be Molly Dewson and say that it's just around the corner, but I hope that it will be.
Well, I think that's a good answer, and I guess I would say I don't know if the Democratic Party can succeed in doing this, but I don't think the Democratic Party can succeed if it doesn't try to do this.
I think that is so well put. I think you're exactly right.
Well, Nancy Altman, president of Social Security Works, as always, thanks for your great work in this area, and thanks for coming on the program. Good to talk to you.
You too. Thanks so much.